Good morning and welcome to 365 Days of Amazing Stories with Theo Mayer. Here we are on day 354 and I'm continuing the story of a sneeze. Now, as you might remember, the prince has been laying on top of this hill in the middle of this cemetery on a full moon night. It's rather spooky, kind of eerie. Wild dogs barking in the distance, bats flitting about, shadows looking long and distorted. Hot and sticky, but cold and kind of misty there on the ground. And the prince has been laying there. He's cold and he's sweating at the same time. Sort of like what happens when you have a fever, but he lays still, waiting. Eventually, he can hear the procession approaching. The soldiers, his princess, and the wise old woman. He lays still on the ground, and as the procession gets closer, the wise old woman says, "Here we are. This is what I have been looking for. A fresh corpse, and look at it. Still with that, look of a fever upon it. The skin damp and shiny. Here is the perfect corpse for the demon king to inhabit. Bring the table," she called to the soldiers. And one of the soldiers brought the light table that they'd been carrying with them. The old woman had him place it over the prince's body, and then she draped a cloth over the table. The soldiers stood around in a circle, some distance away. They had been forewarned that once the corpse was inhabited by the demon king, it would sneeze, jump up, and grab one of them and rip that one of them to pieces. But then the princess would be free. A great duty, a great honor to be that one taken by the demon king. But none of the soldiers wished to have that honor. So they stood back a little bit. The princess stood close to the table, and the old woman began her incantations. After the amount of time that seemed right to the old woman, she nudged the prince, letting him know that it was time. He took the sack that was, folded away in his clothing out, pressed it to his nose, breathed deeply in, and sneezed. And as he did, he jumped up and threw the light table away, casting it far away. And the old woman, doing her part, screamed like a banshee, a fearful scream. Now, of course, she had told the princess all that was going to happen, or the princess, I'm sure, would have gone running down the hill, as did all the soldiers. They even left their spears and lances, any shields that they had brought. Anything that would have slowed them down, they dropped upon the ground to run. After a few moments, the old woman looked to the prince and said, "Great job. And here you two are. Now you may go where you please and be wed and joyous." "I shall go home," she said. And off she started down the hill, the prince and the princess going down another side and laughing as they went. Eventually, the king figured out the truth of what had happened. He called his counselors together and he said, the prince and the princess, quite witty they are. We need to seek them out and find them. For if they love each other that much and devised a plan for their escape and their union, certainly they will make that great couple that I thought they would. Let's find them and bring them back, and I shall have the prince emplaced as king. So the counselors, and they agreed, of course, heartily, and the prince was eventually found with the princess. It wasn't that difficult to find them. They were brought back to the kingdom, and the prince was emplaced as the king, and the princess, of course, as queen. And they began to rule Benares and the surrounding kingdom splendidly. All the people loved them. Well, days passed. The old king, he was loved, and he loved not having to tend to all the things that he had for all those many, many years. The young king, one day he was out walking with the Brahmin, the sword-sniffing Brahmin. It was a hot day. They were walking and talking. And as they did, they stopped, sat down at a bench in one of the gardens. The sun was beating down on them, and so they felt it was better just to sit for a little bit than to continue. And they were sitting in the shade of a beautiful tree, but still, the temperatures were, well, hot. Now, the wax that held that ivory tip onto the Brahmin's end of his nose, it had softened to the point where suddenly the tip, it drooped. And before he could catch it, it fell to the ground. He put his hands up to cover his face. And the prince, or the king, said, don't worry. It's okay. Yes, you lost, because of a sneeze, you lost the tip of your nose. Well, you made a mistake. But now, everyone knows you for being an honest and truthful man. You learned a great and important lesson. Now, interesting, isn't it? When I think about this, the sneeze, it brought you to that. And it was a sneeze that won me, well, not only my love, the love of my life, but also a kingdom. Isn't it amazing how such a little thing, such a small little thing as a sneeze, can have such, huge consequences? It seems this is true in life. The smallest little things can end up having the greatest impacts. Well, that conversation somehow was shared with others, and eventually the old wise woman heard what her prince and king had said. And she smiled. She thought, that is lovely. Isn't it great that he has certainly learned something? And we'll leave that story there. Maybe it's good to contemplate those little things and what great impacts they can have. Know that each little thing you do sends out ripples. So choose wisely. Think before you speak and act, so that those ripples as they go out might be as positive as possible. Okay, thanks for joining. Have a good rest of your day.